My guest here in the Wonderfest studio is Dr. Sean Randolph, president of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute. That's a public-private partnership of business, labor, government, and higher education headquartered in San Francisco. Dr. Randolph holds a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts and Harvard. He also studied at the London School of Economics. And Dr. Randolph holds a law degree from Georgetown University. This man knows something about diplomacy, economics, and the law. Welcome to the Gamma sector of the Milky Way, Dr. Randolph.
Well, thank you very much. I haven't been in space very often, but it's so great to do it so close to my own home.
Excellent. Thank you again. Dr. Randolph is here to answer some tough questions about economics and energy. Let's get right to it. My first question is historical and comes in two parts, very long ago and merely long ago. How has the human control of energy contributed first to our welfare as a species, and then second to the welfare of nation states?
Well, energy has been central really to the development of civilization since day one. If you think about people in caves with fire and what light brought and heat and warmth, that was energy. If you think about transportation, when people used boats and sails and the technology of different vessels that harnessed the wind, when you think about horses and wagons and steam trains, the earliest automobiles, every form of transportation that we've used as a civilization has involved some form of energy. And as our societies have evolved technologically, we've used more and more sophisticated forms of energy. So whether it's in a global sense or whether it's in a national sense, the use of energy and the forms of energy we use have tracked our societal expansion and development. This has, of course, affected our lives in critical ways. It's brought heat to our homes, it's brought mobility. At the level of nations, it's been a mixed blessing. Of course, energy is considered fundamental to national well-being. It's fundamental to national security. If you think back to wars that have been fought over energy, in World War II, one reason the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor was that they perceived that the U.S. was trying to deny them access to oil. There was an oil embargo on Japan. If you think about what happens in the Middle East today and why people care so much about what happens in Saudi Arabia or Iran or the Persian Gulf or even Iraq, it goes back at the end of the day to energy. And the perception that access to supplies of oil is fundamental, which in fact it is, to the societal well-being of any country that either produces or consumes energy, because we are heavily dependent today on fossil fuels, on oil and natural gas, as well as on coal to heat our homes, to produce our electricity, and to power our vehicles. And so from a national standpoint, energy is critical to everything we do, to lighting our buildings where we work, to powering virtually everything, our appliances. We couldn't do without it. But because of that, at the national level, it's been a point historically of competition for energy resources. It's been a source of conflict. At the end of the day, it comes back to the fact that energy, for any country, is essential to its perception of its national security, and therefore it becomes a matter of tremendous priority for governments around the world.
Thank you. And now, an up-to-date question. Today, Dr. Randolph, how does the price of energy affect our nation state, the economy of the U.S.?
Well, a lot of what we think about when we think about as just ordinary citizens, forget about even the policy questions for now, is the price of energy. Of course, if energy is more expensive, that is to some degree a burden on your budget, on my budget, on the national budget, and those resources are not available for other purposes. And so, of course, there's a lot of sensitivity to the price of gasoline, of course. Overwhelmingly, despite the presence of hybrids and a few electric vehicles, the vast majority of us still drive vehicles that are powered by gasoline, and that will probably be the case for many, many, many years, for decades to come. We don't have quite the same problem in the West Coast, but in the East Coast, where it gets really cold, the Midwest, the price of home heating oil is a big factor. And whether those prices are up or down, or they are subsidized in some countries, that affects the comfort of how we live. It certainly affects our budgets as those prices go up and down. And guess what? They go up and down depending on what's happening in places like the Middle East and other countries that are producing oil and gas that we import. And so it affects us in that way from a national standpoint. If you think about our trade imbalance with the rest of the world, and everybody knows we have a big imbalance in our trade, we import a lot more than we export. What a lot of people don't realize is that a big part of that import bill is oil. If you take the oil out of the picture, in fact, we do pretty well in terms of the balance of what we buy from overseas and what we sell overseas. But the fact is, we buy a lot of oil from around the world because we don't produce enough here, and that causes a big deficit. So the price of energy, whether it's coal or oil or gas, and it gets translated at the cost of the gasoline we buy for our cars, the gas we use to heat our homes, the coal or the natural gas that's used to run most of the power plants that provide electricity for our communities, it's all very dependent on the price of that kind of energy at any one point in time. And so, of course, it becomes a very important thing, not only for you and for me, but for policymakers in our cities and nationally and around the world, to try to keep that price as low as it possibly can be, because to the extent we're using the money on energy, we're not using it on other things we'd like to do, whether it's discretionary spending or social welfare or a lot of other things. So it's good if we can produce the energy domestically and it's not subject to big price variations and crises in other places like the Middle East outside the U.S. And it's good if it's cheaper because it enables us to do a lot of other things that are arguably more productive with that money.
Compared to most metropolitan areas, is the San Francisco Bay Area economy more sensitive, or is it less sensitive to energy price changes? And why?
But here in the Bay Area, I think we're in the same boat as everybody else. We are no more dependent or independent for our energy than LA or New York or Chicago or any place you can think of. We don't produce a whole lot. We are mostly using oil. Very much of it comes down in ships, comes in the Golden Gate Bridge, comes down from Alaska, from the North Slope of Alaska. We've got some big refineries here in the north part of the bay on the Carquinez Strait, and they produce a lot of the refined products that we use in our cars and other petroleum products we use in industry. We use gas that comes in across the California border from other parts of the western U.S. And so most of the energy that we consume comes from other places. And that's true almost anywhere, unless you live in parts of Texas or parts of Oklahoma, or you live in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. You're going to import most of your energy. And I think from that standpoint, we share with almost anywhere else dependence on energy we don't produce here, and to that extent we share a certain vulnerability. We all would be subject to significant dislocation and probably higher cost if the continuous flow of that energy from wherever we get it were to be disrupted.
Thank you. My last question asks about the future of energy economics. What difference would a truly cheap and clean energy supply make? And which aspects of our lives would be most affected?
This is a fun question because it gets us into some new territory that is both challenging but perhaps a little creative, where we have the opportunity to exert a little more control over our own future, where we're not as dependent perhaps on vulnerability of supplies of energy and the price of energy coming from Saudi Arabia or some other place. Now, I think we're going to be vulnerable to those things for a long time to come. Decades at least. Systems don't change that fast, even if you want them to change fast. But we are clearly on the road to a transition. May not happen fast enough for some, but on the road to a transition from essentially a fossil fuel based economy, so that's coal and oil and gas, to one that is more based on renewable energy. Now again, this is not going to happen overnight. We have a transition already right now with shale gas, of which there are enormous quantities in the US and around the world. We've known it's been there for a long time. Only a small fraction of the oil and gas in the ground is actually recoverable because it takes so much money and technology to get it out. But with new technologies, in fact, it's a lot cheaper to get it out now than it used to be ever. And now all of a sudden we have an abundance of natural gas that will last for decades and decades and decades. So that's a good thing. Basically, gas is, because of its abundance, pretty cheap. We have a lot of it domestically, which means we can import less from overseas. That's a good thing too, keeps that money at home. And it burns cleaner. It produces fewer greenhouse gas emissions, produces less carbon when you burn gas than coal or oil. So all of those three things are good. And because we have this gas available now, it's going to help the transition as we move from high carbon emission fuels to lower carbon emission fuels. It's a double-edged sword in a way, though, because we need to accelerate the transition to renewable energy, to completely non-fossil fuels. To the extent that there's cheap gas or even cheap oil, it means that the financial incentive is less. The price difference is less to make that move to completely renewable energy. So there is an impact on the market for renewable energy that all this gas is producing. Well, that means, because we want the gas, that there needs to be transitions we all make as individuals in how we personally choose to use energy, and there need to be transitions at the policy level in cities and counties and states like California and nationally around energy use. And that brings us to clean energy, renewable energy. There's all different forms, of course. There's biofuels. A lot of research is going on around biofuels. You can power jets. You can power military jets. You can power commercial jets now on complete biofuels. It's more expensive, but you can do it. It's proven technology. You can put solar panels on your roof, and the cost of that is dropping like a rock. It's much more economical than it ever was to put solar up. It's happening in large commercial buildings, government buildings, happening more and more in our homes, and the price will keep on dropping, and it'll be cheaper and cheaper as time goes on. Vehicles, we already have a growing number of hybrid vehicles. Those will become adopted increasingly over time. There are electric vehicles, all electric. That may take a while to catch on. You've got to build the infrastructure for that, and it's not an easy or quick thing to put the infrastructure in everywhere where you could drive 100, 200, 300 miles in any direction forever and be able to charge your car quickly like you can fill a gas tank. To the extent we have renewable fuels for transportation, for electricity, you can have large energy plants, electricity plants powered by solar power. We're doing that now. To the extent you do that, guess what? You're not having to buy oil and gas from someplace else. That means that money is available for other things, and it means we're not vulnerable to supply disruptions. It means we're more independent. We have more choices under our control, but probably the most important thing is because of climate change. It's an accepted fact among the vast majority of people that the climate is changing, it's getting warmer, and that to some significant degree, human activity is the cause of that. Most of that activity relates to, guess what? The use of energy. It's energy that we're burning in fossil fuels. That's causing the carbon buildup in the atmosphere that is progressively heating up the climate more. And climate scientists predict some pretty serious consequences over time, increasingly serious over 30, 40, 50, 100 years and beyond, unless we can control that and reduce the carbon emissions and slow or stop the rate at which global temperatures are rising. Well, how do we do that? A lot of it is, again, the personal choices we make about how we, as individuals and as companies, choose to use energy. But there are also policy choices to be made in government. But if we can do this, if we can make this transition, at the end of the day, we are more secure because we're less dependent on other people for energy. But perhaps most importantly, if we can make this transition, our lives will be better and we will ultimately be more secure in ourselves and our economies and in our cities and our homes. So there's a lot of reasons why we should focus on this now. And we've begun the transition, why we need to pick up the pace and make that transition happen as quickly as we can.